In this episode of the Game Design Library podcast, I sit down to speak to Adam, Chon, and Ben from Crowbar Collective. Discussions range from stories of their time developing the beloved and critically acclaimed remake of Half-Life, Black Mesa.
Immediate amount of media attention that the project got just right out of the gate.
It's just, it should not have worked. It started in 04, and then we shipped 1.0 in 2020. So, like, if you're using that time frame, it's, what, 16 years?
They're doing it for the passion and doing it for the love is an important part of it.
To development of their new game, Rogue Point, a cooperative first-person shooter they have been developing for the last 5 years.
You made this really good single-player narrative experience. What makes you think you can do a multiplayer game? I think there are definitely advantages to us, like, sort of getting out from under Valve's shadow. Well, it was meant to be small, which here we are 5 years later since we started pre-production.
Sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy. But yeah, so to get started, I think it'd probably be good for people watching / listening if you guys introduce yourselves, your roles, and yeah, the story of how you guys came together initially.
Yeah, so I guess I'll lead off and say that I was project lead on Black Mesa, owner of Crowbar Collective. I actually met Ben in college at the Art Institute of Pittsburgh. And then Sean came on to Black Mesa as a level designer way back when.
Yeah, how many years was it, Sean, from when Black Mesa first started before you came on? Or months, I don't know.
Believe it or not, I'm a relative newbie to the team, especially compared to these two. I've only been on the team for 13 years or 12 years.
Yep,
so quite a while. It was after the mod release of Black Mesa is when I jumped on.
Okay. Cool. How about you, Ben?
What's your role, John?
I'm the lead level designer. I started out as a fan of Black Mesa myself. I'd been following it since I was a kid, funnily enough, and I played the mod release and I really enjoyed it. And I ended up making a mod for said mod, which expanded certain sections that had been missing at the time, and then it got relatively popular. And at some point, the team actually approached me and asked if I wanted to work on Black Mesa itself, and that was kind of how I ended up on there. I became lead around 2018, 2019 for Zen, kind of when we were working on that, and then kind of just the rest is history.
Mm-hmm. We rejected you initially, didn't we, before you did the OAR mod?
I don't remember. Maybe
I blacked out.
It doesn't remember.
The feelings of inadequacy.
I distinctly remember after those mods had come out that we were like, oh, we got to get this guy on the team because it was really well done.
For sure.
Well, I made it there eventually. That's what really counts.
Yep.
Yeah. My name is Ben Truman, and I'm the lead writer and designer for Rogue Point. I was story lead on Black Mesa, and eventually a designer for Zen as well. And like Adam said, I met Adam and a big contingent of the team. We all met and worked together at the Art Institute of Pittsburgh.
Nice, cool. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. How many of you were at the at Pittsburgh initially?
Carlos, Chuck, me, Adam, Andrew, Jeff. Was Russ on there too? Was he? Russ Brigman, animator as well.
I think
there's got to be a couple more in there.
I'd be terrified to forget somebody, but there were quite a few contributors through out Black Mesa. But we had a nice little friend group that was very supportive and pulling people onto projects, and it was a great resource to have. And won't go on a tangent, but that's the benefit of in-person college is you start building those connections, and the industry is all about that. It's definitely who you know in the industry that is a huge help.
Yeah.
No, what's interesting for me in particular, because as someone who's fresher out of college or university, where there's been many times, I don't know if you guys have had this experience as well, but before Black Mesa, where you try to work together on a project and then eventually it'll fizzle out because, I mean, to be real, the main motivator being money isn't there. So what do you think was the difference between any other potential projects and Black Mesa to get people not only on board, but then to stay invested for the long run?
I would say just the immediate amount of media attention that the project got just right out of the gate probably was enough to keep people, clicked in and motivated to keep going. Is it just we could tell that there was something special here that people were interested in, and I think that's largely responsible for everyone staying together. Also, kind of being at the really like the just the beginning kickoff of like this kind of remake culture, like I think also having the blueprint there originally, like having the Half-Life, like the lighthouse and the fog, the thing that we were all moving towards, was also probably responsible for it to, to stay on the rails, so to speak, because we knew what we were building and what the, the relative, shape and size of it was.
Yeah, just all of us being diehard fans of Half-Life and the sequels, and like just having that energy of like the episodes coming out and having this SDK that we could just leverage and like work right into was really good to keep the motivation up. And like whenever we would reach out to people like industry professionals while we were in college, they were like, you have to finish this project. Like you've got a lot of notoriety right now, but like if you don't finish it, it's going to go down in history as like a big missed opportunity. And I think a lot of us took that to heart of like, we really want to finish this. And, it was, for a lot of us, it was meant to get us into the industry. Like this will be our big portfolio piece that we can show off to people and get us a job. And it did, but then it like flipped back around and then it actually became our careers itself.
Yeah. What was the...
I would also think that maybe more specific to Black Mesa, and I don't know how this would necessarily apply to the industry now. I think that also the like gold source and source modding culture and the sort of prevalence of that at the forefront of people's attention was like a really big contributor to that as well, because you could really get a lot done, and like that was kind of the scene at the time, and people were really excited for stuff like that. So that like prospective games becoming mods was also a relatively new thing. Mods becoming games was a relatively new thing at the time. But it caught people's attention, I reckon.
I mean, like probably like maybe 10 years ago, it felt like not every other game, but like a lot of games that were coming out were originally mods using source. Like I mean, probably one of the more famous ones is the Stanley Parable. Which is interesting.
And like Red Orchestra and like tons of zombie games that developed real things.
Just one more thing on that. You mentioned like it kind of got a lot of attention immediately. What was that like? Was that like you were showing it off at an event and it caught someone's eye? Was it you woke up and all of a sudden it was all over the internet? And like, how did that feel if you cast your minds back to that?
I think it was just it should not have worked, because we would just do like screenshots and like because of the amount of talent that was on the team with like art and level design, like we could just put out these really pretty screenshots and they would just instantly get traction. Whereas like today you have to do like a viral video or something to even get like a modicum of attention from the internet. So like I don't know, it was just like the right place at the right time for those initial things to get that attention. And then once we had that, people would revisit it. Like we even made a vaporware list one time of like things that are never coming out. And like, it's kind of like a badge of honor, like in a weird way. But yeah, I think it was a lot of right place at the right time.
Like G4 TV. We released a trailer, and then, within the week that trailer was showing on television. And that our fellow classmates and stuff were also aware of, and I think that was also just like there's a weird energy behind it, just that just kept building up speed as it went.
It's the community too, like people are just ravenous for Half-Life. Like people, anything that has that title just like gets traction, and people want more of it.
Yeah, and it sort of like transcended as well to like other Valve games, I suppose. Like there was a big boom of Portal 2 sort of like spiritual successors and that sort of thing. But yeah, I don't want to tread too much of the same ground that like obviously the very popular No-Clip documentary did on the development of Black Mesa in particular. I mean, if you want to talk about individual things that maybe weren't covered in that, or you want to talk about again, that's fine. But the development of Black Mesa from start to finish was 8 years. Is it
more than that? I think misremember. I think it started in 04, and then we shipped 1.0 in 2020. So like if you're using that time frame, it's what, 16 years? And then we continued development after 1.0 to do definitive edition and a couple of updates to keep it relevant.
Was that? I mean, obviously you were college students when you first started. What would you say was like the longest stint of maybe like full-time development from like the majority of the team, or was that ever the case? Was it always, whenever people had time to work on it, then they could? Would you say?
Yeah, pretty much. Sean, my thought was like Surface Tension Uncut was sort of like when things started getting serious. How do you feel on that?
Yeah, I would say that because the mod release was 2012, and then I think we put it on Steam in 2015.
Yep.
And then obviously I think we started getting some money in, so then it became a lot more real. And then I think it was I don't remember when we released the official Surface Tension Uncut, but I remember that was around the time where we were all working on it a lot more seriously now and kind of really putting in full days and stuff like that. I know that for me at least, that was when I started working pretty much full time on it. So yeah, I think that was about, and then kind of that whole period between then and Zen's release was probably the most intensive development period. It had its ups and downs, but especially around the many missed deadlines. But that was when it kind of really seemed to be in full swing to me.
Yeah.
Regarding the deadlines, was from my understanding, there wasn't like a publisher attached to Black Mesa. No, so were these kind of like sort of self-imposed deadlines that? Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's very Valve as well. So if anything, it's an homage to them.
Self-imposed and announced, which is a huge learning experience for us. And I think it is important to like put yourself out there and take that risk on like announcing stuff and whatnot. But like some of them were like, we learned a lot from like, oh, we probably shouldn't do that in the future. But it all worked out well, and like I said, total learning experience.
Yeah. But
they were always fun as well, because we used to have different schools of thought across the team, where some of the team members were thinking we shouldn't announce these release dates. We're gonna screw ourselves over, and then we inevitably did screw ourselves over, and then we kind of have all these debates about, see, we shouldn't have announced it, and then others of us would say, no, we still need to be doing this, even if it's a bit embarrassing. Like we need to be, holding ourselves accountable and letting the community know that we're still kind of active on this and giving them, even if our estimates are bad, it's still good to show that we're developing the game and working on it and like being honest and open about it, which I think was a really important aspect of actually why things ended up working out so well, because we were working to a standard that we knew we wanted to uphold, and so every time we would miss a deadline, we knew it was because we wanted to make the game better and we could make it better. And I think the community were very receptive to that actually, and like obviously we've got some memes and stuff around it, but it was all very like it was a good experience in that regards, even if it was a little bit difficult sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
When it comes to the end of development, when you finally click, who clicked the button to launch on Steam? Who was the person?
That's a good question.
Hubie? Was it Hubie? Yeah,
I think
usually.
So.
Yeah.
What did you guys? Were you all on a call together? Because you're all remote, aren't you? So you're all on a call together. Yeah. What did you do to celebrate once that moment happened?
I must have like blacked out and. At the 2020 release. I remember in 2012 we were all in a Skype call, just having drinks and having a good time. But the 2015 release, I don't remember, and I don't remember 2020. I don't know if you guys do.
I think we were all in I don't remember if we were working on Discord at that point, but we were in a big call. I remember that. And I remember it was a big moment in that regard.
Yeah.
I don't completely remember it either, to be fair.
Yeah.
I wonder what happened.
The streams. Yeah, we watch the streams together, and then watch it go to the front page of Reddit, and just jump in and talk to people, wherever we could, and just kind of just watch the reaction overall. And I have a tradition where for all of our releases, I would drink just a glass bottle Mexican Coca-Cola. That would be my like special
That's
treat
awesome.
to myself for those events.
Nice.
I didn't know that, and we're still using. I'm glad you mentioned the watching streams and stuff, because we're still using that on Rogue Point. Like through all our demos and outside tests, like hop into people's streams, and like even if like nobody's watching them, it's so great to see people's reactions and to be like, oh, the devs are in the call with me, like and them get excited about that. And sometimes we don't mention that we're there so that we can get like earnest feedback, but other times we'll be like, hey, what's going on? And like it's just really fun to chat with those people.
No, it is cool. So I want to ask, what are the key outside of what you already said, the key like design and development lessons, mainly around design, that you took from Black Mesa. But I think for people listening who maybe don't know, who haven't played it, it'd be good to talk about, because obviously it's predominantly a remake, like, but you did add extra stuff to the game. So what were the additional things which were added, and then going into the design of those, what do you think you learned, or your intent at first, and then what you learned from implementing those aspects of the game?
I had a couple of things, but Sean, why don't you start?
Oh, way to put me on the spot.
You don't have to.
I think that, and I don't know if some of this comes from us being in, I do think of our team as being in a bit of a privileged position in that regards, because we were working on an IP that's so well designed overall and like very highly regarded. So, that's a blessing and a curse in a sense. But one of the things that I definitely learned across my time working on Black Mesa, and kind of like as I improved as a level designer, or at least I hope I improved as a level designer, was that really loving, doing it for the passion and doing it for the love is an important part of it, but also just kind of trying to understand the underlying DNA of what you're doing, I think was really important to how we finished Black Mesa, and like what we did on Zen in particular, because we with Zen we set out to redesign it, but we still wanted to follow the original blueprint, just kind of improve on it in areas where we could. And I think we were struggling initially with that because it was such a monumental task, but eventually it kind of started to click for us when we were sort of really understanding the way that Valvian design actually worked, like under the hood, the sort of 3-act structure that they follow in terms of like their puzzles and how they introduce, and just kind of and Ben actually was really helpful for me, at least, in kind of helping to break that down and like make it click in my head. And when I started actually playing around with those concepts after I understood them, that was when sort of I found that my levels were really starting to actually be something fun and interesting, and we could kind of build those together as a team. And like it'd be a feedback loop as well, because then I get another level designer looking at something I'd done, and they also understand the underlying concepts of kind of what we're trying to do, and they can kind of build on it in a way that I wasn't able to. And so it's mostly about like both the combination of passion and understanding, I would say, that really helped us kind of, and then it helped us build things very intentionally. I can only speak from my own personal experience, but I know some of the earlier stuff that I worked on before Black Mesa and also during Black Mesa was sort of a bit unintentional. I don't know if that makes any sense, where you just kind of build something that feels fun. You don't really understand why it feels fun or kind of what works about it. You're just kind of doing what feels right. And there's something to be said for that as well. But I think when you have a deeper understanding of kind of the way stuff is supposed to be built, it really kind of elevates what you're doing. And I think that was the key thing that we did well on Black Mesa eventually.
Yeah, I can imagine that being essential for a remake, like that understanding. So yeah.
I always go back to the framing that we did in residue processing, or you did specifically, John, of like we had this area that we needed players to go to, and like you were just kind of like in this back hall doing things, and it affected something that you couldn't see way over on the other side of the level. So like framing that so that when you pull that lever or whatever, I think it was a valve in RP, you can see the effect that you have in the level. Like just doing that game wide was huge for us, and it's something we learned the hard way in Zen through massive iteration, and then we were able to like backport that and like evolve our sense of design. And I have a theory that like everybody sucks at level design, and you only get good levels by testing them and iterating, and sometimes just ripping them apart. So like we had to learn that over and over, of like you have to test it, you have to understand what you're doing, and the first time it's not going to work, and that's part of the process. At Gamescom, one of the journalists, he was a big fan of Black Mesa, and like he was asking really good questions, and one of them was, you made this really good single player narrative experience, what makes you think you can do a multiplayer game? And like I didn't have a good answer at the time, I just sort of stumbled through like the response. But I do think some of it is like tangible in both. Like if you understand good design, you can bring that over into multiplayer from single player. And then like I was mentioning too, like it's all about that iteration and that feedback cycle of like, you think you have a good idea, get it out there, test it, iterate it, test it, and just keep doing that over and over. And that works for a lot of things. And we had a ton of challenges with multiplayer and getting our heads wrapped around that aspect of the game as well. But like it really is down to that process and making sure that we're following that.
Yeah, cool. That makes sense. But yeah, we've talked about. Well, you mentioned Rogue Point a couple of times. So after Black Mesa was released, what was it initially like an immediate thing where you guys were like, right, we need to work on something else? Well, no, not after release, after you did the updates. And what was that like when it came to deciding as a team what you guys wanted to make? Was there game jams? Was there prototyping? Did you go on any maybe real life or online retreats like some people like to do? And also because you just remade a Valve game, was there ever a thought to remake another Valve game for your next game?
Yeah, this was a big thing for me, and initially we sort of danced around the topic in the past, but I'm pretty comfortable saying that like we did ask if we could do opposing force because like we wanted to do that. Everybody wants to see that. I think there are definitely advantages to us like sort of getting out from under Valve's shadow and like not going back into the Half-Life universe because we had been working on Black Mesa for so long. But the big learning experience was like how to do pre-production as a team because we were figuring all that out as we went along. And like I remember messaging out to the team, be like, "Hey, we got to do something next. What's it going to be? We have to document it well so that we can roll into it." And I sort of went away and I was like, "I'm going to make this design document and show it to the team, and it's going to have all the answers, and everybody's going to be able to understand it through this design." And it turns out that's like not a good way to go about that. In the parallels between releasing a game for early access and pre-production are like insane because if you get the core idea out to people, they'll be able to internalize it faster. They'll be able to get on board with it faster. And most importantly, they're going to have ideas that you wouldn't have yourself. So like just sort of leveraging that and like bringing things to the team early is how you get to like those better results. And that was like sort of the friction point with all the other things that we were balancing of like maintaining Black Mesa, starting a full-time company, starting our own IP. Like had we done that as well, it would have like removed that one more barrier that we were fighting in the early process of Rogue Point.
So just in terms of the idea of Rogue Point, was that something which was like an immediate thing when you were thinking about that game design document? Was Rogue Point like sort of like, well, obviously we'll get into it later, but it's probably changed a lot from the initial concept. Was the idea of a multiplayer co-op shooter something which you had in mind immediately?
Well, it was meant to be small, which here we are 5 years later since we started pre-production, and it's massive. And like I think in the grand scope of games, it's still a small concept, but like way bigger than we ever had imagined. And when I was one of my favorite games is Rainbow Six Raven Shield. I think it came out like 2003, and like I would always harass our friends to like come play this game with me. It's really fun. And like if I could get people to play the game, they had a lot of fun with it. But like, oh man, these controls are like dated. Like this is a tough game to play. It's like a first person shooter with like flight sim controls. And I thought like if we could have this tactical experience, but easy to get into, like accessible, like it could be something really interesting. And like that is what sort of drove me to get into doing this game design document that I could pitch to the team.
Was there any sort of like on the initial like when you're going through like essentially the pitching process to the team, was there any sort of like course correction or when you got feedback if like certain members of the team weren't enjoying it? Was there ever any other ideas or any different? Could we have seen a very different game before you eventually solidified, or was it always very much like this is it?
Yeah, I think it started as like a Rainbow Six or a SWAT 4 with easy controls, and then the team really pulled it into like what other games are we referencing? What else works with co-op? We look at Left 4 Dead, we look at Payday, like anything we could get our hands on or potentially reference. We really tried to pull into the game, and there was some friction with that as well. Like just what is this game? So like being able to pull those things in and keep things in scope was like a big challenge, but also like really important to getting the game solidified.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong here.
But I think initially the team were very receptive to your pitch because it was pitched kind of more as a slower paced tactical shooter with slightly more realistic elements. Like we had locational damage on the player and realistic magazines and stuff like that. And I remember the team were actually pretty receptive to it. I seem to remember you did a whole meeting where you went over it, and we were all kind of quite on board with it actually. And then, talking about the pre-production, I think when we got into the process of actually making the game, we not to out ourselves too much. I think we struggled to design for that, especially because I think that our chops were much more towards the arcadey style of shooter that Half-Life provides, for example. So that was where a lot of the sort of changes came in at that point. But we hadn't really foreseen that happening, to be honest. But I do remember that initially we were more sold on it being a slower paced tactical shooter, and we all thought that was what we were going to end up making. But it didn't pan out that way.
Yeah, and I think that there was a lot of the push-pull with our design because, like, if you say accessible, but then you design a system with, locational body damage, like those two things conflict. So, like, really finding what accessible meant, and the term we talked about a ton was like tactical. Like, if this is a tactical game, what does that mean? And I don't think really anybody has an exact answer on that. It's like means different things to different people. But finding the spirit of our game and like where we wanted to draw the line, because we always had the mantra of like inspired by realism but not dictated by it. But yeah, like just refining the systems and finding out what worked for accessibility and what worked for the tactical feel of the game is like a something we're still working with today and like really driving on to solve.
Were there any? I can sort of infer that probably a lot of the initial like sort of major potential concerns with the design was something which was discovered through like the experience of designing and implementing. Was there anything which you, though, outside of that, which you knew from the outset, which was going to be like a big challenge?
No, nothing I can think of specifically. I think the challenge was a lot of it was in the level design because if anybody's played the game or seen the game, we have our office level, which is sort of like our test bed, baby's first level, and then the other levels are much bigger and like you can sort of see the evolution of our design from office to airport, in the challenges that office presented that then got extrapolated out into airport and how that design evolved into a much more Left 4 Dead inspired, because one of my concerns, like our lead programmer Elliot was always pushing, more like Left 4 Dead, more like Left 4 Dead. And I didn't disagree with him, but I was like, I don't think we can have that like that director feel, like that linear experience that Left 4 Dead does, like Valve does, because who can match Valve in that regard? But it did lead to us sort of rerouting the levels, and like if we have this big level, let's not open it up all the time. Let's wind the player through in different directions, and cut off different sections of it so that we can have a more linear experience, without having to have a full-on Left 4 Dead style campaign.
Fair enough. And Ben, as like obviously a writer as well as a designer, was when did the story of Rogue Point and like the theming come into play? Was that something which you had an idea of or a mind of like to begin with, or was it something which developed over time?
It was like when I first came on, like Adam just wanted to, our previous publisher wanted, they were really pushing. We were originally having a very light touch on the story, and our previous publisher was really pushing. Like, we want to have more of a kind of a setting and an idea of who the bad guys are and why. So we started expanding out on that, and just like we already had things that were in lock. Like the art style and the setting that's in lock. So like, how can I play with what's available here? And so we create set up that near future hyper capitalist dystopia idea where you can order like where there's like a mercenary gig economy via a phone app, just like trying to figure that out. And what we discovered, I hope I'm still answering your question here, is we discovered is that the story and the design is very like chicken and egg. It's like having a story helps inform all these design decisions that we have like question marks around, and then those design decisions help reinforce the story and like pull more out of like the world building aspect. And so it's just really fun to be in that kind of cycle where it's like, as you develop more story, then you develop more design. As you develop more design, then you're developing more story. And like we found it's still a pretty light touch story wise, but like it did infuse a lot of like excitement and electricity into the design process by like starting to think about those bigger questions and kicking them out to the team and getting other people to weigh in and having their own takes on our hyper capitalist dystopia and all that kind of stuff. Just like the more opinions we get, the more ideas we get, the better everything kind of turns out.
Yeah, I suppose because like that sort of context gives, like, regardless of discipline, gives everyone that sort of same solid foundation. Then, and then like maybe people who were, I don't know, less involved in either implementing stuff into the game, like for example, like one of the artists, they might have then had a firmer foundation and been like, oh, okay, I get this more now. So yeah, that sounds really important.
Like even go ahead, John.
Well, I remember for me personally, I had been struggling with kind of what we were doing. And then when Ben, I think you posted a document or something with kind of your ideas for this. And I remember that was very much like a eureka moment for me, where a bunch of light bulbs went off in my head and I kind of could see so many future possibilities branching from that. And that really got me excited for kind of what we were doing. And it kind of helped just bring a lot of the elements that we later adopted in. And I know that was true for a lot of the team as well. That like fusion between design and narrative.
Back when the game was much more military, like SWAT team focused, the items that you can be given in game were called grants. Like whatever government organization was like giving you these grants for like new weapons or new equipment and stuff. And then we changed them into dead drops, and then dead drops became this other corporation that was in the world. So like it's kind of like the Amazon delivery lockers that you see out in the world. Like that is now a narrative piece that works with the gameplay piece. And like Ben was saying, we just found lots of spots where we could wire these like world things into the game. Because initially the whole goal was get together with your friends and have fun shooting bad guys, and that was why. But like we realized we needed more why as to like, why am I here? Who am I fighting? And it's something I personally like undervalued at the start, and it like really led to good results, like we were saying.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I suppose that the story aspect, maybe especially at the beginning, but even now is one big difference between Black Mesa and Rogue Point. But I think like fundamentally they are very different games. I mean the core design, but also what they require from a team as well. Was there any sort of like consideration or any decisions that had to be made when it came to going from one type of game to a very different type of game, when it came to either bolstering the team / changing the team, changing workflows, changing engines, being one as well? Like what was that sort of process? I assume that a lot of that happened sort of in pre-production as well.
Yeah, and this could be like its own podcast on like how we went about, because like you said, we changed engines. Like none of our coders knew Unreal specifically, none of our level designers knew Unreal specifically, so like we had to learn all the things. And like I said earlier, some of those skills are transferable, which is great. But when you're coming up against the design friction that's inherently there anyway, plus engines and being a full-time company, that was a huge challenge for us. And like I won't go into too many specifics because, like I said, I could rant about that for hours. But like that was a huge deal for us.
Yeah, I mean, John, did you know Unreal before going into it at all? So as like
no, almost none of the team did.
Wizard.
Almost none of the team did, and it's. I almost think that coming from Source made it worse in some ways, because Source teaches you some very specific ways of working and building things that are absolutely the paradigms themselves are not applicable in Unreal. Like you have to really rethink almost everything, and like especially the level designers, because it's not really a thing in Unreal. Obviously, we still have level designers, but it's much more hybridized with code and with art compared to what you had on the Source engine, where there was this very specific set of things that level designers did. Whereas I think on Unreal, you're much more generalist by the time you're working on that, and that itself was a massive shift. Like I had to learn to code, for example, and some of our other level designers became artists in their own right, just because that was kind of where their disciplines took them. So that was a huge teething process. And I remember like one of the main things that for me was like the biggest challenge was I think initially the team, we were almost like, I don't want to say cocky or arrogant, but there was a little bit of a sense of, oh, we can do this. And we kind of thought of the core part of the game as like an implementation detail, if that makes any sense, because that was kind of how it was on Black Mesa. You know, we had the engine, we had the core foundations all kind of built for us. So we kind of just thought, yeah, we can make that in Unreal and then build the design on top of that. But we just learned that doing the rest of it is actually really, really hard. And so, you know, we probably should, in hindsight, we probably should have recognized that from the beginning. But we kind of just had this can-do attitude that like only a scrappy modding team, I think, could put together. So it was that and multiplayer. The multiplayer aspect was also considerably harder than we thought it would be. Because in our sort of, again, naive can-do attitude, it was sort of, oh, well, you know, obviously there's differences in how you have to design the game, but it's just the same thing with 4 players, right? And we did not realize just how many crazy scenarios that it builds with like the AI, with like a networking and like all these the networking aspect makes the game about 5 times harder to develop than I think we'd imagined. So I think that was a lot of from my perspective, that was a lot of the friction in our jump across, that sort of stuff. And we really underestimated a lot of it.
Was there ever a moment in development where you ever thought maybe we should just make it single player?
Rogue Point, I know multiple times throughout I was like, oh, why didn't we just do a single player? But I Rogue Point specifically, I think it only really works as a co-op shooter.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's like so many ideas we have and so many things we want to do in addition to what we're working on now, and like it, you know, that's the fun part of game design, is like the next new thing, and obviously too, seeing what you create really come to life is like a huge thing about game design. But like we were talking about earlier, doing a game jam or pre-production stuff, you know, should we be so lucky to do that again, like that's what I'm really excited about.
Outside of what's already been spoken about, would you say is there any other sort of like significant design changes which have happened throughout development, either due to production, time, technical restrictions, and yeah, if any of those changes have been made, what were they and why?
I think a lot of small ones.
It was a very, as we've talked about, the scope of the game is kind of, you know, it gotten bigger and bigger as it went, but it was a very stripped down game to begin with. And Sean and I had a couple of very, like, you know, fruitful working sessions where we kind of just like sat down and really figured out what we were missing and what we needed here. And that's where we came up with the ideas for like the smartphone collection off the enemies of your the bodies of your enemies, and like the intel system, trying to make that you know, the folders you pick up in the mission and trying to make that tie into the planning screen, and just trying to, like, I always use the phrase like the pieces on the board. We were just always trying to find, you know, what exists, what's here already, and how can we, what are interesting connections we can make, you know, between all these things that both, you know, fit into the world, fit into the larger design, and also just give the game more oomph, you know, more of like a tactile feel, or gives you more resources to manage and think about, you know. Those are the big changes that I see from what it started as to where it is now. It's just getting in there and, you know, just injections of more video game, you know. That's just like
Yeah, balancing accessibility and depth is like a huge challenge, I think, for anybody, because like we want players to be able to just dive into the game and have fun. But then if you can get them into the game, that's great, but now you have to get them to stay. And like, how do you do that without introducing a ton of mechanics that you now have to tutorialize, and like without overwhelming the player? And like a huge challenge for any game, I'd say, but like something we've really been focused on and working towards.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we talked about challenges quite a bit. What was your favorite part of the game to design and also implement? would you say? Like, I mean, it could be the guns, the maps, the skill system, the dead drops.
I liked the stash rooms that we've discussed before. That felt like this all comes out of that grants idea that Adam was talking about originally. That was like the first thing to me that like kind of keyed me into a direction where this game could go. That's where this opportunity to buy a grant, which is just a collection of randomized weapons and gear. It's like, oh, that's kind of that feels rogue-like to me, or like rogue-lite to me, and like that kind of guided a bunch of decisions then, where it's like, okay, then maybe we can also kind of randomize our levels a little bit and try to get a lot more mileage out of our levels, and create, these level layouts can have all these different objectives, and hopefully we can get a lot more replayability out of a very limited set of missions. We can make them feel unique and different every time that you drop into one of these. And that was, for me, that was like my favorite part, was just like kind of identifying the key and the lock, for like all the potential that the game has. Like we can actually do something that is, tactical multiplayer co-op, these things that Adam is like really drawn to. He's really like focused in on and wants this game to like represent. We can do that, but we can also kind of follow this like natural path that updates it and like modernizes it and makes it something that can like kind of stand in the current game market. That was very validating for me to be able to see what Adam's vision is, and then also see how we can like get that to a place where we think that players are going to want to actually come in and experience this.
Nice.
I think along those lines as well, for me personally, I think the randomization is the big one, because it had, and I'm probably a bit biased because I contributed a lot to that, but I think initially the pitch and sort of Adam's idea was more about, we can randomize the enemies a bit, and we can randomize what doors are locked, and kind of some of those aspects of the level. And it kind of like, it ended up being a happy marriage between a couple of things that we'd done, because one of the issues that we'd had, and this has always been a Crowbar problem, I think, and I can accept some responsibility for that, was our levels were very big. They'd ended up being a lot more bigger and sprawling than we'd wanted. So, when we already had the idea of the different mission difficulties. So when we were playing them on easy difficulty, we were finding there's not much of a difference between an easy mission and a medium mission. So we kind of had the idea to restrict parts of the level to the different difficulties, and then we kind of folded that into, how do we randomize the levels, and how do we set it up so that there's a system that the designers can work with to have different arrangements of the level. And then we kind of just snowballed it from there, and it became this like really crazy system that we've implemented. That I think it's randomness done the Crowbar way, if that makes any sense, because it still has our sort of linear design, our thoughts about player pathing, our thoughts about, what are the bounds of the level, how do we frame this view, but it's still a bit random as well. And like I think it does a lot with a little. So for me, that was always a point of, and when things really started coming together, was kind of, we played them all on easy difficulty and then played them all on medium difficulty, and it felt like two completely different maps. And that was when we were sort of like, okay, this is starting to make sense, whereas before we played them all and it kind of felt the same on all the difficulties. And then the other, the big one, I think of the dead drops for that as well, because the dead drops was always a system, I think, that Adam, you particularly were very keen on, and you really believed in it. And I think a lot of the team, myself included, we liked it, but we're a bit more sort of like, is this really something you can build a game around, or sort of is this a core idea to the game? And then I think as we fleshed it out more and we did some public test stuff, actually everybody loves dead drops. Everybody plays, and I enjoy them all the time. I just they're the only way I get my equipment a lot of the time, and it just kind of became this really fun part of the game. And a lot of it came from just putting the sort of layers on it, where Ben came up with the idea of the dead drops, and then we had the Amazon lockers, and then we had the this is how you get and it just became this big cool idea.
And that's how I think that's where game designers stumble, is like thinking through all those connections that you have to have, because like it's even if you think it's a good idea, what are the layers that you need to then build onto it? How are you tutorializing it? How are you presenting it to the player? Like the effects that go off after the dead drop comes in and like opens up for you, like it's a ton of work. So like you have to manage that and make sure that all of those things are really clicking. You can't just have the good idea. You have to follow through with it, and it's extremely difficult.
Yeah. But what would you say your favorite part of the game was to design, Adam?
Let's see. It's all just such a blur. Going smaller scale, like there's been a couple of times where I've been able to go into the levels and like just nudge the cover around so that the AI is utilizing it better, and so that the players have like a better cover standard, which is another thing we could go off on a huge rant about metrics and all that stuff. But like doing those small updates and then seeing the AI and the players respond to them like almost immediately, like that's the really good stuff when it comes to game design. And it's something I miss, like elevating into like management roles of like, it used to be where like I could make an art asset and like I could show it off to people like, look what I made, it's in a video game. Like that was really satisfying. So like any of those things that you can do in game design are really rewarding, and it's like where the good stuff's at.
Yeah. No, I mean, one thing which I think is like kind of a feat for this game, and it's something you've talked about, is like around and specifically about is the level design of the game, for each individual maps. Like, is there? I mean, you've talked before. John mentioned how it started. Levels would start off really big, and then you start cutting them down. Was there any initial inspiration for these levels from other games? And also, I think it would be interesting for people to understand a bit more about your maybe design rules around these metrics. Like, what are the intentions for these levels? Because designing a first person shooter level is deceptively very, very difficult to do it engagingly, but then to do it in a 4-player co-op game with not just AI enemies, but AI enemies that have a bunch of different archetypes and that are supposed to act differently. Yeah, just talking about that level design process, I think would be interesting.
I think we all agree like our airport level is working the best because the systems were largely built when we were like doing blockouts in that, and we were able to take the systems in the blockout, whereas the other maps were all work in progress. And it had some advantages because we found things that we wouldn't have otherwise found. But the other levels are like retrofit, whereas the airport is like built for. So like in terms of design, like I said, we really looked at everything from like Tarkov to Left 4 Dead and like how we're designing these levels and like the vibe of them. But we really didn't hit our stride until the systems were up and we were working on the airport.
Are those systems referring to like what Chum was saying, where they went from like a bigger level to then like segmented and randomized? So the office, oil rig, and mall were at least partially developed and I assume arted before that system was fully in play, and then airport was white boxed at that time.
Not just the scale of them, but also like the number of levers that we're pulling. Because like Chan implemented a second wave. We always wanted to like respect the player's time, so that if there was like 2 enemies lurking about, they would just come to you, like versus you having to hunt them down in some closet or something somewhere. There's the extraction wave. Like there's just a number of systems that we're trying to utilize to like keep the pace up. Like we want that nice ebb and flow of like, all right, you got a moment to breathe, but now here comes the combat section. But we also didn't want it to be like, oh, there's nothing going on in the level and we're just walking to a waypoint. So like that, finding that rhythm was a huge task for us, and something we're really insistent on like nailing.
We didn't even have the concept of extraction until quite late in development.
Yeah,
which is funny because I think from a certain perspective you could call it an extraction shooter. So like that was a big thing as well. Was that we didn't even have those sorts of concepts of we weren't even completely sure about how the levels would be structured fundamentally. It was the main idea was just go in, kill some bad guys, and do some objectives. And it was much later in development where we had the idea that okay, we'll give players preset spawn locations that they're aware of, and then they'll work their way through, and then they'll go and do an extraction, and they'll fight a wave when they're extracting and stuff. That came a lot later in development, and it really changed kind of the flow of the levels at that point. And prior to that, we were definitely thinking that you would sort of. It was definitely, at least the way I'd been thinking about it was more that you'd play most of the level every time, and it would be more sort of open and branching. So the thing that would make the difference would be you choose to tackle the objectives differently depending on where they are. And kind of as we just developed that, it was very sort of, we found it a bit empty and a bit sort of and that was how the levels got very sprawling. We went on some crazy trajectories, especially with the mall. And the mall is a fun one. We call it the small mall, even though the map is absolutely massive. And it's because I initially made a mall map that was about 3 times bigger when we were building it. Yeah, and luckily I got very strictly reined back on that one. Yeah,
incredible. So I didn't want to go back too much to like the challenges, but I do feel like one sort of area which maybe not tackled as much that we've talked about is so we talked about like from like the sort of an overhead view of the challenges of the game. Just in terms of like your roles in the team in the day-to-day, what would you say is like your biggest challenges, like on a day-to-day basis that you consistently come across, and how you overcome them?
For me, it's documentation and getting that to somebody, because like you have the idea, you have to do the requirements for that, and like there's been multiple times where like either design or code has been like, hey, we need work to do, what do you want us to do? And we're like, Ben and I are like frantically working through documents to like try and get things to people so that they can just take it and have a to-do list and get it into the game.
Yeah,
definitely.
I think that's something which a lot of people like I teach at university, and like getting my students to even consider the idea of documentation. You mentioned it was on a call, Adam, that you've like lectured before or like taught before, and you said like the key skill in game development is English, like being able to actually write stuff down and get it to people. So yeah, I think that's
and just communication in general, and like some of the struggles we had, and like even linking back to like how I initially pitched Rogue Point, we were always an asynchronous studio group of people. So like everything had to be this like giant document, otherwise people wouldn't understand it or like be able to leverage it. And as we became more and more, like meetings and like actual synchronized design focused, like we learned a lot on how to give information to people without overloading them, and like the difference between a design document and a requirements document of this is the idea that we want, and this is the to-do list for people to go and run with. And that's been like, it's something I think we do really well. It's just we never have the time to like really nail things down and get things in order so that production can be as smooth as possible. And I think that's pretty common throughout the industry.
How about for you, Ben? What would you say your challenges are?
I would say my biggest challenge, going back to that idea of like all the pieces on the board. My biggest challenge, at least in this kind of point of the design cycle, or maybe like the last year, has been like having conversations with people that don't result in a mountain of new work to be done. Like how can we figure out how to make the smartest, most efficient moves with what we already have in front of us? Just that John over here, just every time we come out of a conversation, I feel terrible, not because it's a bad conversation, but because like the amount of work is, it's just, it feels totally asymmetrical. Like I just sit here and generate a bunch of ideas, but then a lot of that actually the responsibility of those freewheeling brainstorm sessions usually falls on Sean's lap. So I have to be very like dialed in to thinking about how can we do this efficiently. That's what it all comes down to.
Yeah. How about you, Sean?
I think kind of to bounce off of what Ben said, I think managing that avalanche is part of what's very hard for me on a day-to-day basis, because I have a tendency to just want to do everything, much to the dismay of Adam. So
works great for me.
Some of the things in the game that have worked out really well have just been stuff where I've thought, we don't necessarily have a completely concrete direction on this, but we need to do something. So I'm just going to build it to the best of my ability. And it's very difficult to find the balance there, because if I would also say I might maybe have done that a bit too much across this game. So sometimes we end up with things getting a bit unwieldy, and then we have to strip them back a bit, or stuff that doesn't quite gel and has to be rewritten once or twice. So I think it's just that for this development particularly, it's been that we're so full of ideas, and kind of we always have these conversations that result in lots and lots of new ideas, and then it's about the real challenge is kind of filtering them down. And Adam always errs on the side of really wanting to keep things very simple at a baseline, and that's something that I think we often struggle with. And having Adam kind of chopping things down repeatedly really does help, actually. And we, it's like I guess it's like having an editor at a newspaper or something. You really need that kind of guiding force, and we've gotten better at doing that ourselves, I think. And I think maybe that's where some of the friction resolved across development. I think there was a lot more friction around that initially and kind of in the middle of development. And now I think nowadays we're actually pretty good at it. Like we're a bit more of a well-oiled machine in that regards. But I would still say that my main day-to-day challenge would be kind of filtering what's a good idea, what is actually feasible for us to do, how do we do it in a relatively simple way that we can build on later, and make sure that we don't have to go back and rebuild it again and again. We've gotten a lot better at that now. So
it's that accessibility versus depth thing again, because if I always have my way, then the game's going to be too simple and not engage people. And if people like John and Ben always have their way, then we're never going to be done. So like finding that happy medium is really important. And,
I feel completely outed.
Cut this part. Cut this part.
No, leave it in.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely said myself as well as a designer that if I had my way, any game which I'd work on would never come out. Just gonna try and make it. But it sounds like an interesting sort of like loop. You've got Ben who sort of like creates the ideas, Chon who implements, and then Adam who strips them back, and it just goes in that loop again and again.
What was the joke? I like Adam's katana or something like that. I was always cutting things, I believe. So like, it's very much the routine we have.
I think we've reached the point now where we're very settled in those roles, and it feels quite natural now. Like I feel like it's working pretty well at this point, but it was definitely a bit tricky to get there.
Yeah. And to the team's credit, there's been multiple times where like something just shows up and it works, and it's like, holy shit, this like changes everything. Like this is awesome. And like those are awesome, because most of the time it's the back and forth with development of like, oh, things are never going to get done, and now like the next week everything's coming online. Like it's very back and forth with that.
Well, that's a testament. I was just going to say that was a testament as well, because like I said at the beginning, you guys are a completely remote studio, and the fact that someone can work on something and implement it without a concrete direction and it work is testament to sort of this like shared vision which you've created, and this sort of culture of just people having the courage to be able to do that. Like there's a lot of studios and a lot of companies where people wouldn't even dream of doing that because of the potential consequences. Is that something which was like an intention from you guys as like, sort of like at a senior level at the studio to sort of foster?
I think our culture is one of our strengths, and it's easy for me to say is like the CEO. So like I would be interested in the team's opinion on this, but we're very good about supporting each other and being very positive, and like nobody has any egos. Nobody's like jockeying for position of like power or authority. Like we're a team that like really likes working together, and like when we're hitting on all cylinders, like it's really fun to work with this team.
Absolutely.
Even when we're not hitting on all cylinders, it's fun to work with this team because everybody's there to solve a problem.
Yeah. I as a designer, I always say, like, just when we talk about the culture, my job as a designer, like we were just talking about how I can generate, freewheeling brainstorming sessions all day, but my job is not to always have the best answer. My job is to know the best answer when I hear it from and that can come from anywhere. And so that's like a large part of the job is just like getting people comfortable enough that they feel like they can shoot out an idea, and however good or like or bad or whatever the idea is, just like that they feel comfortable sharing the idea, and it can still get like a fair trial, like a fair shake, and then we can. I think that's a lot of our success comes from that ability, is that anybody feels that they can can speak up, share a thought, share an opinion, and we can try to we'll give it an honest appraisal and try to work with it. We'll see what we can do with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And Ben, you do a really good job of asking why. When somebody raises a concern or has an idea, like I feel like I have to have an answer, like I have to say yes or no, like we have to solve this problem right now. But Ben will just slow down and be like, "Hey, why do you say that? Like, why do you feel this way?" And like sometimes the getting to the root of the problem it's much more efficient to solve it if you just understand what caused them to ask that question or have that idea.
Yeah, listening to the cause rather than the symptom, I suppose.
Yeah.
And Chon, from what I understand with your guys' team structure, Chon, I feel like you have the sort of the most sort of traditional day-to-day oversight over like a group of people which all have the same roles, and that's like sort of like you're not always in the bubble, of course, but as you are the lead level designer and you have level designers on the team, do you see this sort of like, again, to use the word agency is a better word, from designers in your team, and how did that, because like I mean all of you haven't like come from to my understanding anyway, like a traditional game development background where you've learned from seniors and like essentially understood how they did it and then took it once you got promoted up that. And so like how did you find doing that? Like were you the lead level designer on Black Mesa, and was that something which you learned whilst on that, or was it like a new thing with Rogue Point and you had to sort of learn that skill to be a lead on that team?
I was the lead level designer for Zen, so for the last sort of 4 to 5 years of Black Mesa's development.
And you had level designers sort of working alongside you with that.
Yeah. So yeah. I was more of a managerial role, but I've always been, as I think you probably have to be on a smaller team, I've always been a manager that does a lot of work as well. I wouldn't want to work any other way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think for me, probably one of the greatest successes of Crowbar would be fostering that environment where I think we finally found the right balance between kind of top down and bottom up. So, at various points in Rogue Point's development, we've had a little bit of too much in one direction, and then sometimes a bit too much experimentation from the ground up that doesn't work. And I think we've kind of experienced the full spectrum of kind of all the different ways that ideas can come to be and how they pan out. So we've had sort of, suggestions that we thought were bad suggestions and we've implemented them anyway, and they've turned out to be kind of bad suggestions, or, good suggestions that we didn't think were good and then they've turned out good, or, just the whole spectrum of that sort of thing. And I think across that, we've learned to sort of trust the process a bit more and kind of find the right balance of, everyone being able to bring their own ideas in, but also everyone being able to kind of listen to what's being suggested from sort of I want to say higher levels, but that feels really grim. But you get what I mean. Sort of sometimes we have to, say this is what we're going to do, even if you don't completely agree with it. Let's give it a try. And then sometimes it's also good to just let stuff pop up organically. And especially as Adam said, we've had stuff that's just shown up in the game that no one kind of talked about, and it's actually been really good. And I think being able to balance those two things has been really important. And this is something that the level designers, it kind of worked that way on Black Mesa as well, because the level designers will sometimes just do things. And, for me personally, I really appreciate when I can talk to Kim, who's one of our level designers, and he'll say, "Oh, I don't think that's a very good idea." And then he'll just go away and do it anyway. Half the time he might be right. And I'll say to him, "Okay, that didn't work. What do we do instead?" And then we'll kind of go off and have meetings about it. I'll talk to Ben, I'll talk to Adam. And usually we can come up with a solution, or even sometimes, Kim himself will give an idea, and I'll say, "Okay, let's go with that." And I think we found a real balance where individual members of the team feel quite empowered to do what they want, but there's not the sort of chaos anymore that's associated with that. Because I think at various points in this development, it's been a little bit of a free for all sometimes. So yeah, I think I'm not sure if I'm still answering your question or not, but I think finding the balance with autonomy and kind of direction has been one of the great successes of this development. And I think we've only really hit our stride with that in the last year or so, but it feels really good now. And it's one of the things I'm really proud of as a company, I would say.
And one thing which I want to start talking about now is because the Rogue Point is going to be going into early access, and are you guys? I mean, I was gonna ask a question of what it's like to develop a game for early access, which I will ask. But as we're talking about like it seems like you've if you to play on a graph in terms of like your understanding of each other, how you have gotten better at producing the game and working together. It seems to just be going up and up. Is that something which? I mean, it must give you confidence, and it sort of excites you going into early access, because early access obviously requires you to be like on it essentially, where because like it's sort of what you were talking about before, where once it's out there and the players have hands on it, then it's like you've got to be on it in terms of like reacting to it. So I imagine it must be good to sort of feel. It feels like you guys are confident in how you guys are making this game at the moment.
Yeah, and like I was saying earlier, like releasing and leveraging the community is like it was a cornerstone of our design from the very start. Like we knew we wanted to get something out as early, and we looked at games like Subnautica because they were forced into an early access release. Like they needed the funds, so they're like, all right, we're just going to send it. And like it was very rough at the start, and they credited that rough release as saving their project because, like I said, they got input from other people, ideas were generated that they wouldn't have otherwise had. So like we want that feedback, and we want to be able to take that and implement it quickly, so that the game evolves in a direction that maybe we didn't anticipate.
And I think the skill as well that you have, Ben, of the listening to the cause and not the symptom, I think it'll be really beneficial for the community when it comes to like feeling heard and understood, because even if they're all screaming for like, I don't know, one particular thing to be in the game, but really that is definitely not what they want, because then that will break the game. And then being able to see that is good. But yeah, when it comes to what was I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but when it comes to developing this game, it maybe not at the start, but early days, was it always the idea that it would be an early access title?
Yeah.
To leverage that community.
There's a slide in my earliest pitch deck of like the core of the game and what is it. And I, like we were saying, I do think the scope's gone up pretty good, but we still we always go back to that of like, what is the core of the game? How do these features link into that? Because that's most important.
In terms of,
I think,
oh sorry, go on, John.
Sorry, I think we're fairly atypical in that regards, but we had, because I think we've been very fortunate. So but we had such a good experience with doing early access for Black Mesa. I mean, obviously it came with its challenges as well, but the community was so instrumental to like supporting us and being really understanding about the issues we were running into, and kind of proposing ideas and giving us suggestions, and thought that we just knew that we were going to do an early access game again because it was such a good experience for us. It really took the game to places it definitely couldn't have gone otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have like a great community. Like you see it from other studios as well. Like some people might say like, "Oh, why are they doing an early access game again?" Because they clearly have the budget. Because I can see 100,000 Steam reviews on the project, but it's not always about getting that budget to finish the game. It's about getting the community to create that feedback loop, which can be really important. Were there any sort of design decisions which were purposely made because you knew you were going into early access?
I was saying that I think early access gives us kind of padding around some ideas, because there are some aspects of early access where you can just be like, well, we'll just send it out the door this way and see what the reaction is, and we can tweak and fine tune down the road, in response to what we hear out there, how to what its reception is.
Yeah, and it's not just like an excuse of like early access players can accept it, but like we do want that information, and we want to see things at scale, not just our internal testing, but like what everybody else is doing. And I can't remember if it was like the initial part of that core release, but we want to support the game and increase the design as well, not just add skins to the game. Maps are obviously a huge part of that, but like what else can we leverage in the game that's going to like backport to these other levels, so that like if we introduce this mechanic in a new map, that's cool, but it also can enhance what has already come out and the community's already experienced. So like I think that's a really important design goal for us to leverage in early access.
And one thing as well is like there is a very key difference between early access and any sort of testing you can do, is that people have bought the game people have committed to the game, and so therefore they're whether they're playing like a public like demo, or whether it's like a paid for user test, like in both scenarios they haven't made that commitment. In particular with a paid user test, they are actually being paid to be there. So having that commitment, first of all, they're committed to the game, and with it being early access, it's sort of the perception is that they're committed to the journey as well. So that's, I feel like, where you get the most like potent, valuable feedback. Yeah, which is great. Have you ever, because like the initial concept was like 5 years ago, and there has been a perception change in early access where, Subnautica, maybe if the Subnautica was released in that state today, it would not have worked at all, because now, studios, I mean, like I said before, it's not a bad thing. Studios with the budget but still want to go into early access to get that feedback loop are going down that route, which means that early access games are way more polished, have had way more time behind them, and also had way more experience behind them, especially with like these sequel early access games. Is that something which was, as this landscape was sort of changing as you were going through this development, was that ever something that concerned you guys?
Yeah, I think it's something we think about all the time, like leading up to release, of like, what are the standards, and like, again, not having that excuse of like, oh, it's early access, they won't mind. It's like you said, they're committed now. It's easy to be on board with something when you've not paid for it, but if you've paid for it, now the stakes have been raised. And like, I think in general in the industry, I don't know how anybody releases a game that's not early access. And if you look at games like Cyberpunk and like No Man's Sky, and like, these people, they have massive budgets, and they're super talented, like, and they still can stumble over that initial hurdle. So like, what hope do we have with like the amount of talent that's in these industries? But like that said, it's been a part of the design since the very start. Respect players' time, don't be manipulative, get something out there that people can appreciate, and then work from there with the feedback from the community.
Yeah. I also think there's a bit of a difference between sort of being, and I'm not saying that others do this, but I think that there's a fear about this, about being sloppy with what we do because, the community will accept it, versus, actually experimenting with ideas that we are behind, but don't know if they're going to necessarily, because obviously a good idea on paper can not work out in practice, or vice versa. So, and sometimes it's very random what gamers actually end up enjoying or sort of latching onto. I know that like across both Black Mesa and even the Rogue Point stuff we've done so far, we found players really liking things that we hadn't put too much thought into, or stuff we put a lot of thought into that doesn't work out being as sort of popular, such as plug puzzles. So it's kind of just a case of, I think, looking at it in that way, where it's we do care a lot about respecting the customer and about respecting their time and money, and it's not about just throwing ideas out there and hoping that they work. It's we still want to put out ideas that we stand behind, but we may not be so sure about if our way of approaching it was the right one, or kind of if sometimes an amazing idea can just come out of nowhere from like a community member on a forum post or something, and it would be something that we wouldn't have thought of if we'd sat in a room and talked about it for 2 years. So it's a lot of it's about that feedback loop, I think. And that's one of the key benefits of early access, for sure.
We find that with puzzles and like some of the arcs we've done in the past too, of like some of the guesses the community does for how to solve these arcs. It's like, why didn't we do that? It's a much better solve than what we actually put in.
Amazing. With regards to utilizing the community, what particular aspects of the game are you most excited to get feedback on, would you say? Or like, would you think, not even necessarily if you feel like needs the most feedback, but that you think could be like potentially most exciting for the game to get that feedback on?
The difficulty, the economy, and like their players' willingness to come back. Because again, like if we don't have that depth, players aren't going to come back to it. And I think that is part of our design of like, hey, we did an update to the game, why don't you come check it out again? Like I don't expect this game to be something that players mainline every day for a year straight. Like that's not the goal of the game. It's meant to be hop in, hop out, have a good time with your friends. So like making sure that we're hitting that, and that players feel the urge to go back. And just a quick tangent too, that was like a huge point for us. Like the game right now is 8.3 gigs on your hard drive. Like if players want to go back, we need to lower those barriers to make sure that they can hop in, hop out. And we need to make sure that like the price point is good so that you can invite your friends and they're not like overwhelmed, because like there's a bunch of games out there. There's lots of stuff you can spend your money on. Like we need to make sure that our game has what it takes to draw people in.
Yeah, and that's the thing as well. Is something which I've said before to developers, where Game Pass and PlayStation Plus and all that exists now, and it's becoming more and more. It's sort of like kind of what's happened to TV and movies. It's less so like, what do I spend my money on? And it's more so, what do I spend my time on? And so respecting that time for the player, I think, will be really appreciated. Yeah, and just moving on to the last question. When it comes to the EA sort of roadmap for Rogue Point, now this isn't like a question to ask like, oh, what date is this dropping, what date is that dropping, but more so, what are you most excited for that's like you've been working on and it's going to be in, I don't know, EA update 1 or 2 or whenever, that you're most excited to get out there and for players to see, which might be a surprise for them?
Yeah, for me, it's the we have an idea for a campaign of the month, or like some sort of timed event, that even if it's just as simple as 3 missions that we strung together, and it's a little bit more locked down than what we're doing with the rest of the mission structure. And then maybe you put a nice reward at the end of that, like you beat these 3 missions and you get a sweet outfit or a sweet gun skin or something like that. I think there's a lot of design opportunity in there, and it's a way to draw people back and keep the game interesting. That's both not an incredibly huge lift on our end, but could be also a lot of fun.
I'm excited about more mission locations and our bosses, our 5-star mercs that we're trying to introduce. They're 5 stars because it's like like an Uber driver. It's like your top rated mercenary. That's why they're the 5-star. But yeah, like I'm most excited in those things. The kind of adding big, interesting, like the pinnacle of the campaign, the big climactic battle. Like I'm looking forward to having more varied conclusions to all the different campaigns.
Yeah. What would you say, Sean?
Well, again, I'm probably biased, but I'd be most excited for new levels and kind of the community's response to that. And I'm really looking forward to actually getting to develop like aspects of the layout with the community's feedback, because even with any of the maps we've done so far, we haven't really been able to do that because they were already kind of pretty far along in development. Obviously we'll make adjustments to them as you can, but I think being able to do that more from the ground up would be really fun. And especially as we talked about earlier, because we have a good understanding of kind of what the game is and how it plays now, we can also build them from a much stronger baseline than before as well. So those 2 things together, I think, will make it really fun and will add a lot to the game as well. So
one more question that I have is, obviously you guys are known for being modders. That's how you started out. Is there any sort of plan for mod support for Rogue Point?
Yep. That's in the roadmap for 1.0, and it's going back to like the benefits we had on Black Mesa. Is like we had this SDK that we could just leverage, and then Valve built this mod system that we could just tap into, and it was a ton of work, but it was there. Now we don't have as much as that, so we got to figure it out on our side, but it's a huge benefit for us because our campaign structure is dynamic. So like if we can find a way that you can inject a mod level into our campaign, like the sky's the limit now, with what the community can generate and how it wires into our game, and it could be a really good lift for us. And like we don't want to like offload our responsibilities onto the community of like, oh, your job to make the content now. Like we have lots of ideas that we want to pull the trigger on, but like having that in addition to what we want to do is like really exciting.
Yeah, I think there is a huge difference between games which are built for user generated content and then games which definitely thrive from it. Like I remember, I mean, it was a catalyst for a lot of people, I think, to get into the games industry as well. Like,
totally.
It's not on the sort of same level as modding, but my first instance of knowing that I wanted to be a designer was playing Halo Reach Forge mode. I played Halo Reach Forge mode easily 10 or 15 times more than multiplayer. Like, I just loved making multiplayer maps. My friends would come round and they just want to play my maps and not play online. And like,
that was awesome.
And that was before I even knew what a designer was. So like, yeah, giving people the ability to, if they're already enjoying the game, to be able to sort of flex those muscles and experiment like people coming up, you know. No, that's a really great thing.
And I've been thinking about it in the background and like talking with code of like how exactly can we do this, because it is going to be a big task. But like hypothetically and just thinking out loud, like if Chan could set up a kit, like let's say that there's art assets over here, here's all your mission objectives and stuff over here in a nice little zoo, and like then players can just wire that into whatever they have in mind for like a design competition or like something they do on their own, like they could potentially have results really quick from that, because our systems are complicated, but like Sean's done a really good job of like wiring them in a way that makes sense, and that like you can tweak a couple of numbers and it has like a systemic effect throughout the entire level.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. So one thing which I like to ask at the end of these is whether you guys have anything additional you want to say, because sometimes I listen to podcasts and I feel like that those guests weren't done speaking there. So if not, that's fine.
Note that I had that I wanted to mention earlier is the like pre-production and design, and like design in general. If you can write out your mission statement, whether it's an entire game or like a specific task, and then put the core pillars underneath that, and then write out the features that wire into each of those core pillars, it's going to like greatly clarify like your design. And it's a huge thing we learned throughout this whole process. A, it helps you pitch it to people, but B, like if there's this feature that I'm really excited about, but it doesn't connect to one of those core pillars, like you have to jettison it, because it's probably not going to work, and I can guarantee you're not going to have time in production for that nice little feature that doesn't quite fit with everything else.
Cool.
John, you want to?
Do you have anything?
Do you have something to say, John?
No, you go.
Okay. Well, I'm just gonna say, like, I think one of the big things is just like test ugly, just like get it up on its legs and get it out there and try it out as soon as possible, because you can't like plan it to perfection. You know, like it really does require. It's an interactive medium. It requires interaction as one of the development steps. You know, so just like get it up in its ugliest, worst possible. Don't be afraid of the worst possible version. Just like get it up and going as soon as possible. I'd also like to say we love working with you, Niall. It's been so great having a like another designer brain on the team, and like someone that we can also like really like trust to take an idea and like think about it and like contribute to the game. We feel like you're like an honorary member of the design team. You don't feel like a corporate attaché, like you feel, it feels like you're really invested in the group and like the project itself, and it's really nice working with you.
Yeah, no, I mean that's really nice of you to say. Yeah, no, it is a pleasure always working with you guys as well. 100%.
Yeah, right on. Good.
You've helped us so much, genuinely. Like we really appreciate having you on the project.
Thank you.
And then just to kind of piggyback off what Ben said, the prototyping is actually a really big thing, because. And this ties into some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, because we were making a transition source and then a transition to being a full-time team. I think for the first year of the project, we struggled really badly with prototyping, because we just didn't quite have the skills necessary to get stuff even stood up to that state. And I think that caused some of the issues we had across development, where we had to kind of rework things later on because we just weren't able to get them stood up to test early. So I think, if we're talking to anyone that's looking to get into game design or kind of work in that sort of thing, prototyping is absolutely critical, and you cannot skip that step. And we suffered from it, not because we skipped it intentionally, but just some of the aspects of our situation and kind of the way the team was moving at that point made it difficult to do it. So that was one thing. And then the other thing I was going to say is I think also this development has really taught us the importance of pre-production. And again, just due to some of the realities of, how we had to move as a company at the time, I think for various reasons, the whole team weren't completely involved in pre-production because we were sort of split across multiple projects. And then I just think it wasn't something that we had understood was something that we really needed to put a lot of time and collective effort into. And I think, and it was a bit unfair to Adam, I think, because there was a lot of an aspect of, Adam, just go and sort that out for us and then bring it here and we'll kind of do it. And we hadn't really recognized collectively, I think, hey, we should all be doing this for as long a period as we, can afford to and as makes sense. So I think for another studio or anyone that's starting out, I think do not underestimate the importance of a good pre-production cycle and making sure that the whole team can be as involved as is practical in your situation. I think that would have drastically helped us with the development of this game.
I'm thinking like if and when we do another game, the production schedule should build it twice. Let's build the entire game in blockout prototype BS, and then that is now our design document. Like, how does this system work? Oh, look at the prototype. Like, that is, I think, how you have to build a game these days, because otherwise there's just so many things conflicting and you're stomping on each other's work, and like, I fixed this one thing and it broke the rest of the world. Like, that's I think the ideal way to make a game. And I'm sure there's drawbacks to that too, like namely time, but like that's how I'd like to do it next.
Yeah, no, that sounds right. Like the combination of sort of like the inspiration and the foundation of like context and narrative, as well as like actual tangible like prototypes, because I mean it sort of like leads into like why designers have such a struggle having a portfolio, because design is one of the most difficult things to communicate, and it is not tangible whatsoever, and without being able and having the skill set to prototype, then you're never going to be able to I mean people must have, but I find it very difficult to think of people who would get a job or convince anybody via just a game design document, because even if every single sentence in that document is solid and makes sense, it's gonna most likely come across completely differently to someone else. So yeah,
it's something I see with people in high school or in college. They're like, I want to be a game designer, and it's like, well, that you can't really get into the industry with that. You have to have some other skill set that they're like, hey, this guy also knows design. Let's leverage them, because like you said, it's so hard to like portfolio that or like present that, and everybody's got good ideas. Articulating them is super difficult and super hard, but it's also hard to advertise as like, this is my skill set.
Makes sense. So yeah, if there's nothing else, then I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for this episode of the GDL pod. And yeah, thank you for spending time with me.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This has been a blast.
Yeah,
thanks, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, the great questions. Thanks for putting so much effort into those. That was a lot of fun.
Worries. And there we have it. Thank you so much for listening to episode 2 of the Game Design Library podcast. And thank you again to the team at Crowbar Collective for coming on and talking about not just their development of Black Mesa, but for their brand new game Rogue Point as well. I found in this episode there were a lot of really interesting insights, not just in terms of how they developed the games, but also how they designed them as well. In particular, the fact that they went from a remake in Black Mesa to their own completely brand new IP, Rogue Point. Tune in again in 2 weeks for another episode of the Game Design Library podcast, where I'll have on another guest talking about the design and development of their own games.